Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the regular meeting of the West Covina Planning Commission for Tuesday, September 24, 2019, here in the City Council chambers. We will begin. We will rise for a moment of silent prayer meditation, and that will be immediately followed by the Pledge of Allegiance, which I will go ahead and lead tonight. So please rise for the moment of silent prayer. All right, Mr. Director, may we have the roll call, please?
Commissioner Holtz?
Here.
Commissioner Hing?
Here.
Commissioner Kennedy?
Here.
Commissioner Jaquez?
Here.
Chairman Redholz?
Here. Next is approval of minutes for our meeting of August 13. Does anyone have any changes to that? If not, I have a minor, just a spelling correction on Mr. John Shoemaker's name in page 2. The fourth paragraph down, it should be Shoemaker, S-H-E-W, as opposed to S-H-U. It's a minor thing.
You can correct that.
Okay, thank you. Any other corrections? Nope. All right, this is the time for oral communications, when anyone in the public can address the commission on a non-agenda item. I don't have any cards for oral communication other than the public hearing. So seeing none, we'll move on. Item number 2 is our public hearing scheduled for tonight. It's a general plan amendment number 18-02, zone change number 17-02, Queen of the Valley Hospital specific plan, certification of an environmental impact report. The applicant is Eminent Health, formerly known as Citrus Valley Health Partners, at 1115 and 1135 South Sunset Avenue. Mr. Anderson, who will be presenting that report.
Yes, we're going to have a sort of a team approach on that. This is a general plan amendment and a zone change, which includes a specific plan. So that document is a zoning tool, and then there's an environmental impact report to go along with that. This is a very large, allows a lot of additions, up to 500,000 square feet or near that. And we have a team of consultants that have been helping us with this. First on the far right, on your far right, is John Moreland. He's with KTGY, and he is the preparer of the specific plan, as well as the contract planner who prepared staff reports and resolutions. And then on the left of him is Kent Norton, who's with SOMAS, who did the environmental preparation. So they're both going to be presenting their parts of this report. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to John.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Commissioners. My name is John Moreland with KTGY. Just to give you an overview in terms of the key dates for the Queen of the Valley specific plan. The applicant at the time was Citrus Valley Health Partners, now Eminent Health, submitted the specific plan application to the city in December of 2017. Kent and I were selected in the summer of 2018 to assist the city, as well as Eminent Health in the facilitating of the specific plan, as well as the environmental document. In August 9th, 2018, we held the first neighborhood information meeting to gather input from the neighbors surrounding Queen of the Valley Hospital. November 15th is when the process really started getting kicked off in terms of planning, when an EIR, Environmental Impact Report, scoping meeting was held. The information from that meeting led to the creation of a draft environmental impact report, which Kent will go into more detail in a little bit, but that was released on April 11th. and we held another community information meeting on May 13th, 2019, and the comment period on the draft EIR concluded on May 28th, and before you here tonight. To give an overview of the context of the specific plan area, it's approximately 28.8 acres, the western portion of West Covina. It consists of the main hospital complex, a parcel containing a medical building at 1135 South Sunset, and a former open space, the Sunset Fields, located just northwest of the Torrey Pines Apartments. The primary access to the specific plan area is through South Sunset Avenue, and there's also an access through an easement along West Merced Avenue. And Interstate 10 is north of the site. When we create a specific plan, we generally have objectives which guides the development. Early on in the process, in addition to some of the needs that Emanate Health had regarding the facility, there are some strict OSHA requirements in terms of seismic capabilities that would require extensive upgrades to the facilities at Queen of the Valley Hospital. In addition to that, facilitating future development improvements on the property. We wanted to provide hospital and outpatient service resources that evolve as the health care needs of the surrounding community are evolving. Another objective is to plan, construct, and operate the campus in a manner that minimizes disruptions to the surrounding neighborhood. Provide additional facilities and supporting uses that will create high-quality jobs and economic vitality in the city of West Covina. Replace outdated, obsolete buildings with modern, energy-efficient facilities that can accommodate innovative therapies and practices, and this could be done by tenant improvement as well as new construction. And also, we wanted to phase parking expansions to accommodate existing and future demands. Now, when we crafted this specific plan, back and met originally with the Citrus Valley Health Partners, they did have an original conceptual master plan shown here. The buildings in the gray are the existing campus facilities, and they did identify future improvements of a new emergency room as well as intensive care unit and surface parking lot. The surface parking lot covering essentially where the former Sunset Fields were located, as well as new parking structure, new medical office buildings, and eventually, in the longer term, in phase 2, potentially a new hospital building, and eventually in the long term, which is shown in pink, essentially a mirror image of a hospital building. Now, this was used to craft the development standards in the specific plan. It is anticipated that that phase 1A, the surface parking lot, and the emergency room and ICU, will be coming forward shortly. However, the other phases indicated on this graphic were going to be more longer term and would be flexible. There's even discussions now that the medical office buildings may move into the surface parking area where this building is. So flexibility is necessary in the specific plan document. So with that, I'm going to go over the components of the specific plan. This exhibit shows the proposed land use plan. Encompasses all roughly 28.8 acres. The current intensity is just over 1 million square feet of hospital uses and 325 beds. The specific plan allows for a maximum potential intensity of 1.58 million square feet and up to 525 hospital beds. Also, just to identify this land use plan, and identified as well as in the specific plan, identifies that the former Sunset Fields the general plan designation would be request to be modified from the existing parks and open space to commercial, which is consistent with the other designations of the rest of the Queen of the Valley campus. And the intent of these 3 zones is to have Zone 1 is going to be the core medical, where most of the core medical facilities are going to be located, the hospital, the inpatient beds, and things like that. Zone 2 is going to be more of a transitional zone for office, geared towards more medical office buildings. And Zone 3 is we identify as a transitional flex, which is going to be a lower, essentially a lower intensity zone adjacent to the wash and the residential. In comparison to now, the specific plan 1 was originally adopted in the late 1980s, and this is a comprehensive specific plan update. Going to highlight the significant changes from the existing specific plan to the specific plan that's before you tonight. The allowed uses in the current specific plan, they've been expanded to allow retail, pharmacy, and daycare uses within zones 1 and 2. Most uses will require a conditional use permit in Zone 3 in the more passive area adjacent to the wash and the residential. That's except for office, data center, research, and open space and recreation, which will be permitted by right. The specific plan also allows for minor temporary events such as receptions, gatherings, festivals, and farmers market, provided that all these events are at least 70 feet from residential without the need for a temporary use permit. And larger special events such as carnivals would require a temporary use permit. And with this, the specific plan also includes a variety of different setbacks. In the brown line adjacent to the residential introduces a tiered setback from residential. It would require a 15-foot minimum setback for all physical improvements. Anything 2 stories would be required to have a 30-foot setback, and anything over 2 stories would require a 45-foot setback from that residential area. The 5-foot setback would be required adjacent to the abutting medical office facilities, as well as a 15-foot setback from the wash and the existing open space facility, open space at the rear, and a 10-foot setback, required 10-foot setback from Sunset Avenue. And the specific plan also includes a minimum 10-foot landscape buffer that would be required adjacent to residential open space or Sunset Avenue. Some other items are the height was limited up to 3 stories adjacent to the park, wash, and residential. That's within that Zone 3 area. Up to 4 stories is permitted along South Sunset Avenue within the first 50 feet adjacent to the right-of-way, and the remaining height limits is 6 stories elsewhere. And the current specific plan essentially limits the height to just 6 stories. This specific plan also increases the parking requirements from 1.5 spaces per hospital bed to 2.5 spaces per hospital bed. Part of our scope of work did include a parking analysis to assess the parking demand on site, and identified that the existing parking requirements per the city's standards were too low, and recommended a 2.5 spaces per hospital bed. Office parking requirements will be the same as existing code, which is 1 space per 200 square feet. The specific plan also includes a provision to allow the possibility for future parking modifications per essentially a parking study review that would have to be presented by the Planning Commission. The specific plan allows a maximum build-out of 1,580,000 square feet, which equates to a maximum FAR of 1.26. The specific plan also includes design guidelines, which regulates items such as building placements, building design, colors and materials, windows, mechanical equipment, lighting, and signage in the Chapter 4 of the document. And this section also includes environmental sustainability strategies. And then one last item to mention too is, although the specific plan essentially establishes the framework of the zoning code, zoning regulations for this area, any type of physical structure would require a future precise plan of review that would go forward before the Planning Commission. And one item just on to note of that, any type of environmental review with the existing EIR would also be conducted as part of that as well too. And I'll segue to Kent, who'll talk about the EIR.
There. Thank you, John. Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Kent Norton. I'm with SOMAS. I prepared the environmental impact report for this project. Let me give you a brief overview of the CEQA process to put it in context before we talk about specifics of the EIR. The California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA as we call it, is the state's overarching, it's the broadest environmental law that we have. Different than most environmental laws that are very specifically focused on a particular aspect of the environment, CEQA provides a process for lead agencies like the city to evaluate the potential environmental impacts of a project. Any discretionary action that the city does that it has discretion over, CEQA requires some type of environmental review. The purposes of CEQA, when it was established in 1970, were to disclose the environmental impacts of a proposed action, to identify mitigation measures, those actions which might reduce or eliminate potential impacts of a project, to identify if there are significant impacts of a project, to identify alternatives to the proposed project that might eliminate one or more of the significant impacts, and it provides a forum or a process for transparency so that the public can see how the decision makers make their decision based on objective information that's provided to both the public and to decision makers. The CEQA process essentially allows a balancing act of potential environmental impacts of a project versus the potential benefits of a project, and that decision is always made at the local level. CEQA is a very locally based environmental law, even though it is a state umbrella law, as we call it, that provides the process, but that process is always done locally. An environmental impact is the most extensive environmental analysis document that you can prepare under CEQA, and there are two general kinds of EIRs. One is called a programmatic document, and that would look at a proposed action that might be more general in character, like your general plan, for example, something more policy-oriented, as opposed to a project-level analysis or an EIR that would evaluate a specific proposed action, a specific number of units, or a specific square footage of commercial building. In this case, we have a little bit of a hybrid because the EIR, although it's generally a programmatic EIR, because the specific plan is a programmatic type of document, it establishes policies and guidelines for the overall development of the site. Phases 1A and 1B, the first part of the development part of the project, is fairly well established, and that was actually looked at a project level because we had enough information to actually evaluate that as a project. So it's a little bit of a combination there, but the overall EIR looked at the entire amount of development that was proposed under the specific plan, and as I'll talk about it in a minute, it evaluated the potential impacts of that entire proposed expansion and recommended mitigation measures, for example, for the various aspects of the project as time passes. Okay, just a quick overview of the CEQA process that we've been through so far on this project. In the summer of 2018, we developed the project description for the project, which is the basis for all the environmental analyses to look at the various aspects of what's proposed to be developed, and therefore that's what's used as the basis to analyze the various impacts of the project. Notice of preparation was issued on October 30th of last year, and that essentially lets all the agencies and the public know that the city is going to be preparing an EIR for this project and outlines approximately when additional public comment will be accepted on the document itself. As John indicated, we had a scoping meeting that was open to members of the public as well as public agencies on November 15th, so agencies of the public could come and express their concern or desire for the city, what kinds of impacts they were concerned about, what aspects of the project they were concerned about, and that allows us to then focus some of the environmental analysis in the EIR specifically on those concerns. So after we collect all the information during the notice of preparation process and the scoping process, we prepare a draft environmental impact report. That's this document here, not an inconsequential document, and the appendices to which are even so large that they have to be on a electronic media and, attached to the document. So that document provides a complete analysis of all the potential impacts of the project, and I'll get into those in a little bit. That document is circulated for 45 days for review by the public and public agencies to review and to make comments on the draft EIR. That review period was April 11th to May 28th of this year. And then after the review period, the public review period closed, we collected all of the comments on the draft EIR and evaluated them and responded to every written comment on the draft EIR in written form and prepared a final environmental impact report that included what we call the response to comments, which, as I said, it addresses all written comments on the draft EIR in written form. In this case, there were not a large number of comments on the draft EIR. I'll itemize those in just a moment. So after the final EIR is prepared along with the response to comments, all of that information, including the draft EIR, that all goes to the decision makers, and that's where we're at tonight at this Planning Commission hearing where you'll be evaluating the EIR materials and making a decision recommending certification or not to the City Council. City Council is proposed for November of this year, and after which, if the project is approved and the EIR is certified, a notice of determination would be filed with the county and the state, indicating that the CEQA, the EIR process for this project, had been completed. As I indicated, the EIR addresses a wide range of environmental topics. In fact, we addressed essentially all of the 18 topics that are indicated under the state CEQA guidelines, which ask 88 separate questions about potential environmental impacts on a variety of issues, including traffic, noise, air quality, even greenhouse gases have been added in recent years, tribal cultural resources in addition to cultural resources. So all of the issues were analyzed in detail. Okay. The conclusions of the EIR include there were two identified significant impacts of the project. One was greenhouse gas emissions. And I should note, though, that because of the kind of project it is and because of the size of the project, that even the existing hospital itself exceeds the accepted significance thresholds for greenhouse gases. So obviously the additional square footage, the additional activity at the hospital exceeds the established CEQA thresholds for that, even with the mitigation measures that are proposed. In addition, there were significant traffic impacts identified on Sunset Avenue, 3 intersections, Cameron Avenue, Merced, and West Covina Parkway. The level of service and utilization of those intersections would exceed the accepted significance thresholds, both the city and county levels for significance. But I also should point out that that's for the existing levels plus the project and at general plan build-out. It should be noted that those intersections would have significant impacts even without development of the project. So all of the other environmental issues and impacts identified in the EIR were determined to be less than significant. There were 45 mitigation measures that were recommended in the EIR to address potentially significant impacts of the project. Almost a quarter of those were for traffic and the timing of various improvements that would reduce the traffic impacts. There were a number of intersections that are already exceeding significance thresholds, and the project would be adding to that. So a number of measures were developed to indicate improvements at various intersections that would reduce most but not all of those identified impacts. There were other mitigation measures as well, and cultural resources, utilities. I believe you're provided with a copy of what's called the Mitigation Monitoring and Reporting Program, which identifies not only the mitigation measures themselves, but it says how those measures will be implemented, and the implementation of those measures have to be monitored over time as the project is implemented. The EIR also examined 4 different alternatives to the proposed project because there were significant impacts identified. There was a no project alternative, which essentially is no development project. One is developing the site under the existing general plan and zoning designations. The third one would be a reduced intensity of expansion of the hospital at approximately 50% of what is currently proposed. And the fourth alternative was a senior care facility with some modest expansion of the hospital as some type of alternative use for primarily for the Sunset Field property. The EIR concluded that the existing general plan and zoning alternative would eliminate the significant impact associated with greenhouse gas emissions of the project, but that alternative would still have significant traffic impacts, and that alternative would not achieve the goals of the project to nearly the same degree as the proposed project. So those alternatives were rejected in favor of the proposed project. There were 4 written comment letters submitted on the draft EIR. 3 were from agencies. 1 was from a private organization. The 3 agencies were Caltrans, which had a number of questions about how the EIR examined freeway queuing, fair share contributions for improvements, regional vehicle miles traveled, signal coordination, and public transit. The county sanitation districts provided clarifying information about sewer facilities and the potential for wastewater generation of the project. Suburban Water Systems submitted a comment letter reminding the city that subsequent permitting would be required for various project improvements that required water service. And the 4th comment letter was from the Torrey Pines apartment homes adjacent to the northern part of the project, and they had extensive concerns about setbacks of the project, buffers, the location and size of parking structures, et cetera. So the final EIR, as I mentioned, includes a response to comments on the draft EIR. As I said, 3 agencies and 1 private group, plus we had a late comment, which was very indirectly related to the EIR from a union, a lawyer representative, or a lawyer representing a local union. The final EIR identifies what corrections or additions are made to the draft EIR as a result of comments on the draft EIR, and those include changes to the specific plan related to setbacks and buffers, clarifying some aspects of the sewer services, and also clarifying and providing additional information on potential freeway queuing impacts, which were determined to be less than significant. The final EIR obviously includes the draft EIR and all of its appendices as well, the mitigation monitoring plan that I mentioned earlier, and what are called the findings, are essentially a separate document that outlines the conclusions of the EIR and makes certain findings that are required by state law and CEQA guidelines when approving an EIR, as well as because there were significant impacts of the project identified that could not be reduced to less than significant levels even with mitigation. There was a statement of overriding considerations prepared that basically provides that that balancing act that I mentioned earlier about what the benefits were of the project that could outweigh the significant environmental impacts. And the statement of overriding considerations identified 9 specific considerations or areas where benefits of the project that this project would provide locally and to the region. And those include obviously meeting local and regional health care needs, providing economic or improving the economic vitality of the city, providing fiscal benefits to the city. The project, as John mentioned, the project has been designed to be sensitive to its surrounding neighbors and would provide quality design. It enhances non-vehicular accessibility on the project site and in the surrounding area. It improves the jobs housing balance of the city. And if you're not familiar with that, regional organizations like SCAG, Southern California Association of Governments, requires or certainly encourages local jurisdictions to provide a balance of jobs and housing to try to reduce regional traffic congestion. And so a community that has, quote, an excess or is housing rich, such as the city of West Covina, when a project provides jobs within that city, it is helping improve the city's jobs housing balance in the furtherance of regional planning goals. The project is also consistent with the city's general plan goals, and it also meets very stringent green building standards. So with that, unless there are questions, I will turn it back to John to wrap up, and then we'll take questions, right? Okay.
Thank you, Kent. As Kent mentioned, one of the comment letters that we received during the draft DIR process was from the Torrey Pines apartment homes community. And just to give you a little bit of context, based on the comment letter that we received during the draft DIR period, we did make some revisions to the specific plan from a previous draft. These changes that are identified on the slide are incorporated into the draft specific plan before you, but just go over them just for context purposes. Previously, all the uses and most of the uses in Zone 3 did not require a conditional use permit. Now it's required to any type of development in there, except for open space, recreation, office, data center, research, and accessory uses would now be required to get a conditional use permit within Zone 3. Previously, we had just a 15-foot setback from the residential, and we increased those setbacks to include tiered setbacks ranging from 15 feet to 45 feet, depending on the height of the building. We also included the existing city code requirement, requiring a block wall separating commercial and residential uses, incorporated that requirement into the specific plan. We also included additional design guidelines related to decorative wall requirements along residential development. The specific plan was modified to require that bicycle racks and lockers are located close to the building that they serve. We would prohibit walkways within the landscape buffer that's adjacent to the residential, essentially within the residential landscape buffer, unless it's required by OSHA or state federal disability requirements. The specific plan is modified that all non-construction outdoor temporary events be located at least 70 feet away from residential uses. And we also added the existing city code requirements related to the parking lot design requirements, the minimum dimension requirements and percentage requirements that's in the existing city code to memorialize that within the document. And recently, on September 17th, the city did receive additional comments from the Torrey Pines representatives requesting the following. And I'm going to go just over the following item by item, and then just also briefly mention our recommendation as well. These items have not been incorporated into the specific plan before you. So item number 1, Torrey Pines representative requested that all parking structures be set back at least 70 feet from residential. Staff recommends that the FE final EIR does identify that, and we recommend the specific plan to include that provision. Item number 2A, related to decorative boundary walls. Torrey Pines representatives requested to include decorative wall guidelines for walls separating the residential and the specific plan boundary. We do have decorative wall guidelines on page 4-15, and we believe that no additional modifications are needed to that section. Torrey Pines on 2B related to decorative boundary wall, they also requested the increase in wall height to 8 feet. Our recommendation is to maintain the existing 6-foot requirement that's identified in the specific plan for consistency. We did just fold the existing code section in that requires the residential and commercial boundary. I think it would be an inconsistent application, could lead to an inconsistent application of the regulation that's in the code. Item number 3 is the landscape setback area. Item 3A is to request to add the language that's identified in the final EIR to the specific plan regarding the landscape setback acting as a buffer to protect privacy as well as to reduce noise. On page 4-11 of the specific plan, we do have guidelines indicating that the landscape between the residential and the specific plan area shall be designed as a buffer, include dense plantings, and to reduce the visual connection to residential. And we don't think any modification is necessary to that based on that comment. And then 3B, also related to the landscape, is to expand the definition of walkways to include pedestrian paths and bicycle paths within that 10-foot landscape buffer between the specific plan area and residential. The specific plan does prohibit sidewalks on page 5-10. However, the language in section 552, the specific plan, is inconsistent. And also, we do recommend to amend that section 5.5.2, as well as expanding the definition of the sidewalks within the specific plan to include the walkways and bikeways as requested. Item number 4 was a request to prohibit ground-mounted equipment within the setback area. The specific plan does allow ground-mounted equipment, but however, when the ground-mounted equipment is a certain height, or if it's within the setback areas, it does require an administrative review, which would need to be require approval from the planning director, and the planning director could also forward that to the planning commission. So based on that, we felt that no modification was necessary to that item. And lastly, item number 5, Torrey Pines representative requested to add language that's in LUP-1 in the EIR into the design guidelines of the specific plan. And that states that the design of the buildings, parking lots adjacent to residential uses shall be located and designed to minimize impacts related to views, lighting, and noise on local residents. And we agree to, so we recommend to include that language as requested. And then just one just for paper keeping purposes, we did mail out 448 notices to residents and occupants within 300 feet of the specific plan area, as well as those that expressed interest at community meetings, and left their contact information. The notices were mailed on September 10th. And that concludes my part of the presentation.
So that is going to conclude the presentation. I would also let you know that we do have 2 members, representative from Queen of the Valley here tonight, Chip Riddle and Tony Blakely, so they will be able to speak with you as well. So that concludes our presentation. We'll be happy to entertain any questions at this point.
Great, thank you. Excellent presentation. Any questions of staff at this point?
I have a question.
Commissioner Kennedy, turn on your mic.
Yeah, well, what was the purpose? You know, I know from Torrey Pines, I guess their requests were pretty reasonable. I would like to know why do they need an 8-foot wall? Was there a reason?
What? Well, they can probably answer in the audience tonight too, and they may wish to speak and let you know that.
Okay.
Any other questions of staff? Okay. Then we'll go to the open the public testimony portion of the public hearing. We will ask Tony Blakely, come forward.
Good evening, Council. Thank you. My name is Tony Blake. I'm the Corporate Director of Planning, Design, and Construction at M&A Health. We have an amazing group of staff at Queen of the Valley Hospital. They provide great, compassionate, and safe care, but they do it in dated facilities. Approval of this EIR and CEQA will give us an opportunity to update those facilities. Our ER saw 70,000 visits last year. We anticipate approximately 110,000 in the next 5 years. And they do this with 24 bays. Our new ED will have 60 state-of-the-art bays with a 24-bed ICU above it. Previously, the patient rooms were semi-private, and that was state-of-the-art once upon a time. But now, most patients want to be in a private room, and we're going to eventually get to that point where we will have private rooms. So this is a great opportunity for San Gabriel Valley, for West Covina. You know, Queen of the Valley sees the majority of the patient population here in West Covina. We're looking to build a state-of-the-art cancer center. Right now, those patients that have cancer, they have to go to one of the other academic institutions. We will have cancer providers here with a new state-of-the-art cancer center with a Linac accelerator, infusion center. So we're excited. Great opportunity for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of Mr. Blakely? Apparently not. Oh, we have a question. Thank you.
In terms of building, we're increasing the size from 300 plus to 500. I mean, is there data to support that demand? I'm just curious.
To support increasing the size of the
Correct, the
facility?
hospital beds.
For increasing hospital bed, there is.
Are you anticipating within a few years or?
So we're looking at a 10 to 15-year plan.
Okay.
But we're looking to build a new ED, ICU, and a new cancer center immediately within the next couple of years.
Okay, and then another question is that the hospital level, what level are we at the Queen of Valley? I believe UCLA is a level 4 or 5, forgot, but.
I think we're level 2, right? For ED? For the ED. What level of hospital, the level of hospital level?
It's not a trauma center.
Not a trauma center, no.
It's got to be at the,
Yeah.
can't be heard up there. You got to.
Okay.
Hello, Commissioners. My name is Chip Riddle. I'm the Chief Support Services Officer representing the administrative team at M&A Health. Thank you. Your question was what level of the? It's an ER. We're not a trauma center. Okay, this is not a trauma center that we tried to go for that a number of years back, but the county only selects certain facilities in the region to support the trauma activities. Okay, and qualify for that.
I see. Even with the additions of build out, this still will not be a trauma center.
Correct. Yeah, the main driver on this, as Tony said, is that again, we have an older 20-plus bay ER, which is seeing, and it was designed for 40,000 a year, 40,000 treatments a year, and we are seeing 70,000. And as he said, we're expecting that to grow over the next 5 to 10 years up to 105,000. So we're going to expand that 20 to 60 bays, along with upgrading the aged environment that it's in right now.
So currently, Queen of Valley is what level is it again? Did you mention?
It doesn't have a level rating.
It doesn't?
It's, it's an ER.
Okay.
It's not a trauma center.
Where's the closest trauma center to San Gabriel?
Pomona Valley.
Thank you.
Right. Now, it will be built with trauma rooms and that, so we will be able to take, and it's up to the drivers of the EMS, to validate, the need for the patient. But they would elect to, if it's a significantly traumatized level, they would take them to Pomona. But, they could stop here first and then transport them.
Thank you.
Just real quickly, is there another window of opportunity to add another trauma center? How often does that come up?
We'll look at it again in the future. Again, we're regulated by the county and state for those, and there's a high degree of what you have to provide as far as coverage, types of doctors. It's more than just the environment of the building. There's a lot of elements that to qualify for a trauma center, right? And
Commissioner Holtz?
Yeah, are you planning on incorporating a dialysis center?
Not at this juncture. We have, there's a number of dialysis units around the area, but we are not focusing on that modality at this point. The ER, ICU, and the ICU is directly related to the ER for the patients. We need to expand our ER capacity, our ICU capacity, and then the medical arts building will add on what we call cancer center, an ambulatory surgery center, and what we call hospital-based clinics in that area.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the gentleman while they're at the mic? Nope. I think that's it for right now.
Great.
Thank you very much. Kim Rogers, in favor of the project, according to the card.
Good evening, council members. Thank you very much for hearing me speak this evening. I thought I knew what I was going to say standing up here until I started listening to everything here. I'm speaking out of passion. I'm one of those 40 to 70,000 patients per year. But I will say this, Queen of the Valley saved my father's life because Kaiser Permanente did not have their heart wing open, and my father had a massive heart attack. If it was not for Queen of the Valley's quick action, my father potentially could have died. Having said that, my son also needed to use Queen of the Valley for another emergency situation. And the quick action of the hospital, again, helped save a potentially life-threatening situation. And as I stand here today with my little daughter, who demanded she come today, and she says, it's kind of boring, and I said, yes, it is. I had her at Foothill Presbyterian. They do not have a NIC unit, and she went into distress. They rushed her over to Queen of the Valley. At that point, I was not allowed or available to go, I just had her, over to Queen of the Valley. I literally got out of my bed and I left. Yes, my car was in the parking lot, we'll leave it at that. And by going over there, I had nowhere to park. So I left my car in front of the hospital because they would not have allowed me in with my daughter had I not gone at that point. And as a mother, whether it be a mother or father, grandparent, parent, anyone, when it comes to a family member or a child, it's fight or flight. It is a situation I hope no one ever has to go through. I'd like to thank the commission. I'd like to thank the West Covina City Council, because years ago, Sunset Park was blighted. It was also transient infested, drug infested, alcohol problems. There was a lot of problems. These children could not even play at that baseball park. So Queen of the Valley chose, working well with West Covina, to take on that parcel. And it has sat for years, and they've had the responsibility of taking over the security of that area. And I don't want to feel as though I have to go to Pomona or I have to go to UCLA or USC. That's extra time. Time is of the essence when there is an emergency situation. And it's interesting you asked about what level they are. I understand that, having health issues. Part of the reason with the trauma is it has to be so many miles away. Because I asked that question when I had a traumatic situation happen. That's why a lot of patients are brought to Pomona or they're brought to County USC. There's only so much mileage they have to do. And it is a big thing, because I wanted to push for having a trauma center here. I just heard on the radio coming here that the generations, and I call them vintage, are living a lot longer. It used to be 62 was the average age. It's now moved up to, I believe they said, 73. So we have an aging community that needs help. And we have the younger generation that needs help. And then you have myself, who's a patient, a repeat frequent flyer, should I say, that I need the help. And that hospital has always been there for me. It's very difficult when there's only 20 beds and you have 60 to 100 people sitting in the emergency room that are so mad and angry, because when you're sick, you want to get that help immediately. And that staff wants to help you, but if they don't have the beds, then what else can they do? They can put you against a wall. Then you also have to worry about police bringing in people they arrest, because they also have to be treated as well. And they get treated at Queen of the Valley. So we have to be compassionate about every person and situation. I listened to the Torrey Pines. I got an idea, add more pine trees. I understand that it will impact some people that live around there, but I hope that no one ever has to utilize that. They will be fortunate. They will be less than 1 minute away. I don't have that luxury. So I would hope the commission would consider working with the hospital. It sounds like they want to work with the community in building something that could assist any one of your family members, any one of you, as well as myself. Thank you for your time and consideration regarding this matter.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Next speaker in favor with conditions, Elizabeth Watson.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Elizabeth Watson, and I'm here on behalf of the Nash family, who own and operate the Torrey Pines Apartments. And I just want to start by saying this process has been so collaborative. Every step of the way, I have the highest compliments for the team that presented this in terms of the work on the EIR, on the specific plan, and in particular, Jeff Anderson, in terms of the professionalism and the sense that everyone was really listening to the concerns that the Nash family had. They've owned the property for quite a while, and when we talk about a specific plan that's going to be in place for many decades, they plan to be here. They want to continue to be part of the community, and this experience, I think, has only reinforced that. So at each stage, as was mentioned in the presentation, we attended the different opportunities for community meetings. We submitted what we thought were very precise comments. We have been, from the very beginning, advocates of this project, and we see the benefit to the community at large and the importance of allowing the hospital to really take the next step. And we wanted to be a constructive part of that. So after our letter was submitted, when we got the EIR, when we saw the specific plan, we saw that a lot of our comments were adopted, And we sent a subsequent letter. We had a subsequent meeting. The hospital met with us and their representatives. And what gives us confidence is that as this goes forward, whether it's construction or operation, that there will be an ability to have any issues addressed very directly by the hospital and with the participation of the city and city staff. So we understand the specific plan and the programmatic EIR are really setting the stage for a framework, that there's flexibility built into that, and we understand and accept that, and appreciate the fact that the precise plan process along the way, when there are specifics, will give us another opportunity to come before you, and even before the hearing, to work with staff to try and resolve our issues and to talk to the hospital directly to get those addressed. So we were pleased today to find out that really all of our comments were adopted in some way other than the wall, and appreciate getting the question on that because that is of concern. And as was mentioned, there have been a lot of security issues related to Sunset Park and the ball fields. We understand the hospital is taking ownership of that and that they'll be developing it with a surface parking lot. But the sense is that while the city's code requires a minimum wall height of 6 feet, that in this case, for the protection of the residents next door, it would be, we would really appreciate having an 8-foot minimum size height for that wall, given the specifics of this situation. We understand a one-size-fits-all city standard of 6 feet is adequate in most cases, but given the fact that this will be a parking lot, it will be accessible, given the fact that the hospital is a 24-hour operation, and we understand there'll be activity and probably employees parking there, but we would really appreciate having that extra couple feet of height on this particular wall to protect those residents. So that's really all that we're left with after, again, the collaboration and the fact that we were heard at every stage of the process, and just, again, want to extend our appreciation for that. And if there are any questions concerning that, I'm happy to answer those.
Great, thank you. Any questions of Ms. Watson? She answered it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your involvement. I have no other cards in favor of this project. Anyone wish to speak in favor? Mr. Torres, are you in favor or no? Okay. Also, I have no, Angie, do you want to speak in favor? Okay. Come on up, and when you get a chance, fill out a card, please.
Thank you. Real quickly, I am supportive of the growth, but hearing about the growth, we also have to take in consideration there's 220, I believe, apartments there that make up Torrey Pines. So I don't think their suggestion of having an 8-foot wall, if I lived there, I would want that privacy, because the growth there that's potentially going in the future, very near potentially, it will be a 24-hour service hospital. We have to think of the people typically are there from 8 to 5. They work, they come home, they want to sleep. They also want to have the security around them. So I don't think by asking for an 8-foot wall of the Queen of the Valley or Eminent, or I'm saying their name wrong, sorry. But I don't think that's unreasonable. So I hope we would consider that suggestion of adding the 8-foot wall. Thank you.
Thank you, Angie. Jerry, in favor? Thank you, and be sure and fill out a card afterwards.
I also would like to echo a sentiment on the 8-foot wall. I lived for quite some time in the condos on Sunset next to the Kaiser Clinic, and the wall there was 8 feet. And the residents, because there's a gas station and a clinic, and they really made a difference when they made the wall 8 feet. It helps the residents. And I know people that live adjacent to apartments, they have the 6-foot wall, they put an extension up. The time to do it is now. I would request that you consider the 8-foot wall. It's reasonable. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak in favor? Seeing none, I will go to those against. Mr. Torres, you're up.
Good afternoon. I actually took a peek at the EIR just this weekend and the specific plan, so I know I'm here at the 11th hour, but it was hard for me to actually get to looking at that monster document. But what blared out to me was I'm a West Covina resident. I'm also a West Covina youth soccer parent and coach, and I don't see that being addressed anywhere in both documents, that there is an athletic field where our children play. I think it's around 8 months out of the year, play and practice. And the one blaring mitigation or the impact was the greenhouse gas emissions, and that's why they're adopting what they call a statement of overriding considerations. So essentially what that is, it says, this is a problem, we can't solve it, so we're going to submit this document and show you why. It's why the benefits are more important than the impacts the greenhouse gases will have on the surrounding community. And I actually agree with that. Like when you weigh all those benefits of the hospital providing a regional service, they probably outweigh the effect it's going to have on the children and residents around there. But my concern was that it wasn't really addressed at all in the EIR anywhere. The soccer field, the impacts to the children, the greenhouse gas emissions over time, any mitigations they could do to improve that, because the EIR does state something to the effect of children are more susceptible to greenhouse gas, their lung function. It also said something like athletes breathe through their mouths, so they're more affected. So again, I understand that the benefits outweigh, impacts of the greenhouse gases, because they're going to be providing health services as well. But I'm here today to oppose the EIR and the specific plan just because it really doesn't go into any detail about that. And the alternative 2, which I guess is a 50% less build out, or I don't know if it's 2 or 3, that seems to be more, to me it seems more reasonable because it creates less greenhouse gases and they're able to achieve the same objectives, obviously on a lower scale. But if you read the EIR, it doesn't say that alternative 2 doesn't achieve them. It just says that they'll achieve them at a lower level. So all the objectives are still achieved. Less greenhouse gases are emitted. Less, greenhouse gases are going to be breathed in by the child athletes playing, and so forth. So, and that would be my recommendation. But obviously, there's economic interest. There's a ton of interest. So, who knows if that's even going to be explored because it's half of the project. But that seems to be the more environmentally friendly option. And they still get to improve their services, retrofit their buildings, do all sorts of improvements. And also construction during the season, soccer season. The EIR says that there's going to be 69 tons of carbon dioxide released in 2019 because I guess they're starting construction there maybe. And that 69 jumps to 1,500 the next year, assuming that's all the diesel trucks and all that working. So maybe that needs to be addressed to see how that's going to impact. Maybe the season needs to be relocated. Maybe other fields need to be leased so they don't have to be breathing in the carbon dioxide. And then what was even more troubling when I looked at the final EIR, the final carbon dioxide in construction, they're going to be generating 1,500 tons of carbon dioxide. But when the project's actually done, they're going to be producing annually 13,000 tons of carbon dioxide. So to me, that was kind of troubling. And again, the statement of overriding considerations just says we recognize that, but we're going to ignore it, and we're just going to go for the better option, which, like I said, that's a fair argument. The pros outweigh the cons, but nowhere in the EIR, again, it was addressed how that's going to affect the kids. So for the purposes of this draft EIR, I would oppose it, and I would ask that they go back and look at all those things and actually analyze the effects on the children, athletes, and then maybe even the residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Torres. Anyone else wish to be heard against the project? I have no other cards. Seeing none, I will move to Mr. Robinson, who has indicated he's neutral. Mr. Robinson.
Evening, Commission. Bill Robinson, resident. I live about 3 miles north of the project area. I'm neutral because I looked at Table 3.4 of the EIR, and on the specific plan, on Section 4.3, Architectural Design, Building Form and Massing, they show you a bunch of exterior pictures, and Table 3.4 of the EIR, and it's on page 3.5, Table 3.4 of the, and it talks about the beds and the numbers, but interior architecture is not discussed. And I can't tell whether this idea is included in the project or not. But it's, you know, green building design is great, but I'd hate for us to build a 19th century hospital in the architecture in the 21st century. What I have in mind is, and I can't tell from the exterior pictures, Loma Linda University has sort of a tower design where the nurses' stations are in the middle of a circle, and the rooms for patient care are surrounding the nurses' station. Now, I've been in hospitals before, and they have a kind of like a doorbell or a buzzer or something, and there's long corridors and stuff like that. But there's no line of sight opportunities for both patients and the nursing staff. And with you, Loma Linda, it's a square hospital, but these are circular towers, and the nurses' stations are in between, and a nurse can turn on her heels and look down the corridor, or out, or into each one of the patient's rooms. That's, there's, 3 circles, make up a square. And I can't tell whether that's there or absent. But I suggest, maybe the project, they could answer that question. But it seems like for the benefit of both the patients and the nursing staff, they could provide easier and better care if there's line of sight communication, as well as the old buzzers and doorbells or whatever you call them for notifying staff. So that's my only the contractor doesn't have to reinvent the wheel, because Loma Linda University Hospital, it's always been big, but they're doubling the size, and the construction is going on right now. I mean, all you have to do is get in your car, and you can see that patient care is easier and better depending on the architecture. And I'm just hoping that this architecture will take that into consideration. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Robinson.
Is there any chance to get an answer to that question now, or do I have to wait, or what?
Have a seat and we'll find out.
I hope I explained it well enough.
Sounded great. Mr. Riddle, Mr. Blakely, would you like to come up, please, and address the issues brought up in opposition and in neutrality?
The issue in opposition, I believe, was for to extend the 8-foot wall. No, or just the neutrality here.
Just the
yes.
8-foot wall.
Well, we're going to.
Are you going to listen to Bill?
We're going to get to the 8-foot wall, but I'd like you to address what Mr.
Design?
Torres brought up.
Right.
Mr.
If I understand it correctly, you're addressing this towards the large acute care tower. no design has been developed right now. That's basically a block representation of a footprint at this point. That's 8 to 10 years away. We're trying to get through the first 2 to 3 years here right now with 2 principal buildings, which is the ED ICU building, which is 2 floors, and then the other building, which is a medical arts building, which is also 2 floors, and that's more for those modalities. So we really haven't even gone that far, and other than the parking structure. So those are just in the first 3 years here. I'm sure when the time comes, again, the need for that large tower, the way we've put it, is more for what we call SB 1953, which is we have aged buildings that were built in the 1980s and 90, and we've got a commitment to upgrade those seismically sooner or later before 2030. And that's a major reason why we've looked at the new towers to be seismically correct. Either that or we have to go back into our existing buildings, which the aged infrastructure, and wrap the walls with, for seismic, create new shear walls, that type of thing, which is quite disruptive. So we are working through those solutions on how we're going to do that at this point. But the new tower is basically to support our seismic concern and the growth of the hospital to have private rooms. Right now, a lot of our rooms are 2-bed units, and everybody's moving towards single. Everyone wants a single patient room, and the new tower would afford that as well. Okay.
And Mr. Torres talked about the greenhouse gases and the effects it
I
might
think that's
have
really
on-
really for the our environmental consultant.
Okay, that's fine. We can do that.
Why don't we just hold off on that till you're done with their...
Do you want to talk about the 8-foot wall while he's there? Okay.
Will you address the 8-foot wall?
Well, I think, again, that was addressed with John, and there's some issues regarding setting precedents and that type of thing. So I'll have to kind of defer that to him. He
That's
knows
fine.
the code.
We'll talk about that.
Okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. I will close the public testimony portion of the public hearing, and perhaps staff can address those concerns that the applicant did not.
Yeah, I'll let Kent from SOMAS discuss some of the environmental issues.
Okay, Mr. Torres asked about or expressed concern about the greenhouse gases. Actually, the EIR did analyze in quite a bit of detail potential impacts of not just greenhouse gases. Greenhouse gases, realize those are a global concern. Those are pollutants that are considered to affect the global climate. The impacts that are of much more closer concern, those being athletes, young athletes participating in soccer on a park that's adjacent to the hospital. The air quality analysis was quite specific and detailed about analysis of impacts to what are called sensitive receptors. And in this case, there are residential receptors immediately adjacent to the site. So those were assumed to be the closest sensitive receptors. The children, athletes participating in soccer would be slightly further away, but still, since we're looking at impacts at the property line, essentially, that basically covers impacts that could occur to athletes using the park as well. The air quality analysis did look at potential impacts to sensitive receptors, including the air quality management districts, what are called local significance thresholds, and those are special thresholds for when you have receptors very close to emission sources. And in this case, the impacts were determined to be less than significant. This particular type of project does not require what's called a health risk assessment, which is what the Air Quality Management District and the state typically recommend or require when you have a project that emits what are called toxic air contaminants, or TACs. In this case, the project does not emit those kinds of toxic air contaminants, so no health risk assessment is required, but we did do the standard kind of air quality analysis, which includes carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxides, all the typical kinds of pollutants, particulates that would be of concern to young athletes and their parents and coaches. So even though the park itself was not mentioned other than when we talked about what sensitive receptors were in the area, since the analysis was literally at the property line, it certainly does include impacts to athletes that would be using the soccer fields on the adjacent park. So, in fact, the EAR did an extensive analysis of potential impacts to sensitive receptors, including athletes at that park. And in addition to air quality, it also looked at noise impacts for sensitive receptors as well, and those impacts were also determined to be less than significant.
Thank you. Any questions of staff? Commissioner Heng?
I actually like to go back to the significant impact. You have a spreadsheet. Can you go? I like to go back to the significant impact sheets, and if you can explain what the significant impact. There you go.
The EIR identified two areas of significant impacts. One was greenhouse gas emissions, and that's using standard air quality management district methodologies, generation factors, and using the most appropriate significance threshold. We estimated the potential greenhouse gas emissions from both construction and long-term operation of the hospital expansion and compared them to the most appropriate thresholds. In this case, the emissions from build-out of the hospital operation would exceed the generally accepted threshold for these kinds of projects. I want to point out that public works types of projects like this, public benefit facilities like this, are not specifically identified for thresholds by the Air Quality Management District. It's more typically for industrial warehouse type projects, commercial, even residential projects. But these types of public facilities do not typically have separate or specifically identified thresholds. So we tried to use the most appropriate thresholds, but in this case, because of the kind of facility it is, the kind of activity it would have, where necessarily you have people coming and going, bringing patients, bringing visitors, for example, employees, and the size of the proposed project with the type of threshold that would be appropriate, any facility of this size would have a significant impact in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. As I said, it's simply a matter of the size of the project, even with mitigation, and that would be use of solar panels to help offset electrical generation emissions, some of which are greenhouse gases. So we would still have a significant impact in that regard. On the traffic impact, the other significant impact was identified under traffic, and those are 3 intersections along Sunset Avenue, those being Cameron Avenue, Merced Avenue, and West Covina Parkway. I want to point out that congestion at those intersections at general plan build-out, which for this project was assumed at 2035, those intersections are going to have significant congestion even without the project. But since the project is adding traffic to those intersections, and those intersections cannot be improved any further or much further because there are right-of-way limitations, and you've got residential uses all along the east side of Sunset. Even with the proposed mitigation, the proposed improvements that could be made to those intersections, the impacts were determined to still be significant. So those are the 2 impacts that the EIR identified. And when you have significant impacts identified, one, you have to look at alternatives, which we have done. And the second is if you have significant impacts even after the implementation of all feasible mitigation, then you have to have what's called a statement of overriding considerations that documents that balancing act of the benefits versus the impacts of the project.
Okay, I guess all I'm hearing is that there is a significant impact. What is the impact? For example, currently what we're having right now, do you have a number that basically identifies once it's being built out?
A number. I can get that for you.
That also goes with traffic. For example, if there is an impact, I understand that there will be an impact since we're adding
Yes.
quite a bit of room and square footage.
Yes.
But I like to know, like, for example, if you can give me some type of number, like, let's say if it's today, we don't have a build out, the traffic would be this number. And if we were to completely build out, the traffic would be 2 times more, 3 times more.
Sure.
I don't know what the number is.
I can tell you about that very quickly. I can tell you that the project itself generates about 9,587 average daily trips, additional traffic. So it's almost 10,000 additional traffic trips. 600, little over 600 of those would be during the peak PM period out, and 578 of those would be during the peak period in. The reason the impacts are significant is because we compare the level of congestion that's caused at build-out conditions with our project. We compare that to the thresholds that are established either in the city general plan or under the LA County Congestion Management Plan or their traffic report guidelines, how to prepare a traffic report. We use the thresholds that are established there, or if it deals with a freeway, then it would be a Caltrans, what's called the Highway Capacity Manual. We look at all those thresholds and we see if the traffic from the proposed project is going to cause those intersections to exceed the significance thresholds standards that have been set by either, as I said, either the city, the county, or the state. And in this case, the intersections, those 3 intersections at general plan build-out would exceed the city's level of standard service in the general plan. So those impacts were determined to be significant. And because there's not enough right-of-way to improve those intersections enough to reduce the congestion below the level of significance, that's why those impacts remain significant. I would venture to say that other projects, there are a number of projects, not only in this area, but throughout Southern California, because of right-of-way restrictions or other kinds of restrictions for roadway improvements, very often will come up with significant impacts, especially a general plan build-out, which is 2035. That's quite a ways from now, and that's assuming the entire city is totally built out. So there's a lot of estimating that goes into that process of determining impacts. But in this case, we've tried to use reasonable worst-case assumptions, and we've determined that those 3 intersections would exceed the congestion standards set by the city. And so that represents a significant environmental impact.
Thank you for answering that question. I guess now let's go back to the greenhouse gas emissions.
Okay. What? Yeah. Okay. Thanks. As I indicated earlier, because of the size of the project and the type of project it is, and the fact that it's difficult for a hospital to mitigate its impacts related to traffic, which in this case, most of the impacts, the greenhouse gas impacts are related to traffic coming and going from the hospital. It's hard to reduce those because you can't tell patients not to come to the hospital, and you can't tell people not to visit people in the hospital. So in this case, this particular public facility has limited resources to try to reduce the traffic that comes and goes. One way of doing that, though, is to improve non-vehicular transportation alternatives such as bicycles, buses, pedestrians, but I mean, the bottom line is when a patient has to be transported to the hospital, you don't tell them to get on a bike, you put them on an ambulance. So, like I said, there are limited ways that a hospital can reduce its traffic impacts. There are other kinds of projects that have more control over ways of reducing their traffic impacts. In this case, because of the type of project it is, it's going to generate greenhouse gas emissions that are in excess of what the Air Quality Management District recommends would be a significant level. That doesn't mean the project should not be built. It simply means that's a significant amount of air pollution, and you need to look at trying to do mitigation for it. We have recommended mitigation for this project, but in this case, it's not enough to reduce the emissions from long-term operation of the hospital to less than that Air Quality Management District threshold. So in that case, we have to conclude that the greenhouse gas emission impact are significant. It's actually fairly common for large projects of any type to exceed the Air Quality Management District greenhouse gas thresholds. The thresholds are relatively low, and what it does is it then at least requires larger projects to have environmental impact reports that then provide the greatest level of environmental analysis and scrutiny that you can under CEQA, which is one of the reasons for having lower thresholds.
I guess you answered a lot of the questions, but I also wanted to know how much is it exceeding?
Let's see. The emissions from operation, I'll give you a comparison. The emissions for construction, I'll just go to operations. That seems to be the issue. Operational emissions on an annual basis would be 13,000, a little over 13,000 metric tons per year, which is not that unusual for a project of this size by comparison. The Air Quality Management District Tier 3 threshold is 3,000 tons, which is relatively low for a project of this acreage and size. So you can see that we're 4 times over the threshold. So almost any mitigation this project could do is not going to get below that threshold. And they don't have the ability to, the easiest way to reduce it would be to reduce the size of the project, but that would essentially work totally in opposition to the goals of the project, which is to expand the hospital as much as practical to be able to provide expanded health care services for the city and the region.
I guess I have another last question. Is that the recommendation that you had recommended for them to reduce the gas, what would that be?
They would need to generate at least 25% of their additional electrical output using solar panels, photovoltaic panels, most likely associated with either the parking structure or the roofs of the new buildings. But even at that, even if they generated even if they were able to somehow generate 100% of their on-site electrical use, they would still exceed the AQMD threshold. So you can see that threshold compared to the type of project this is quite low. And that's one reason why they don't have a lot of options to be able to get under that threshold. It's just a result of the way that the AQMD sets its thresholds and sets its methodology for estimating greenhouse gases.
I guess, thank you. And one more thing is there anything that we can add the electric car into this to emit less gas emission for the staff?
The hospital doesn't have its own fleet, and it's fairly hard to regulate individual employees' use of things like electric cars. You can certainly, a public facility like this could encourage its workers to, say, carpool or to use electric vehicles, but at the end of the day, it's very difficult to require them to do it since the hospital does not maintain its own fleet. if, for example, if this was a warehouse project and it had its own fleet of trucks, it would be much easier to encourage the developer or the applicant in this case to improve their fleet to use more electric vehicles. But in this case, you're talking about individual employees, passenger vehicles, visitors, and patients and doctors. Very difficult to require them unless I'm not aware of any requirement the city has, nor am I aware of any requirements that most cities have for requiring individuals to have to purchase or use, say, electric vehicles, or some companies, for example, let's see, some of the incentives might be to use less personal vehicle miles by maybe assisting in the purchase of a bus pass, for example. That's something that could be explored, and I think I'm pretty sure the hospital would be willing to discuss ways of reducing employee or visitor mileage to the site. But at the end of the day, it's very difficult to require those activities rather than just encourage them, because there may be a good reason for them, but it's hard to require development projects to do that unless you're going to require it citywide.
Thank you.
If sorry, this is John Moreland. I have something to add regarding that. The state is rolling out Cal Green requirements, which does require the installation or pre-plumbing of electric vehicle charging stations. And I know that also the existing campus right now does have a dozen, if not close to a dozen, electric vehicle charging stations right now. And as this will go through the process, as the new parking spaces will be added, they will be required to comply with the state sustainability and Cal Green requirements in electric vehicle charging stations.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, Mr. Moreland, since you're at the mic, can you, I'm going to ask him, just one second. Other than citing the municipal code for the 6-foot wall, is there any other reason, or Jeff?
No, that's probably more us.
Okay, more for you. Okay.
And first of all, in terms of priority or level of issue, this is a very low one. But when we look at that, we kind of look at a couple things. When we're creating a specific plan, it's better if you can be consistent with all the other specific plans. We have 30 some odd, and also the municipal code, because it reduces tripping hazards for city staff and for planning commissioners in the future. So that's the first thing. Again, this is a fairly low priority thing, but that's our thought process. Secondly, when we say 6 foot, we're not restricting it to 6 foot. We're saying it's a 6 foot minimum. So sometimes the Planning Commission in the past has required people to put in a wall higher and a commercial boundary with the residential to go higher. So it also gives you more flexibility. So some places maybe 7 foot might make more sense than 8 foot, and if you require 8 foot, you'd have to have a variance to go under 8 foot. So that's the two things I would say. It's consistency with with most of every other standard we have in the city, and then also flexibility that there may be some places that 8 foot isn't the most appropriate, but you can require it to be in another place.
I want to get back to the air here. I've been a coach for over 30 years, Little League, board member, district member, the whole 9 yards. I'm very concerned about this. I want to know. Soccer's I don't coach soccer, but it's a little bit different. They run and run and run. So, point blank question: is the air going to be good? Yes or no?
The air quality impacts of the project will not exceed the significance thresholds established by the Air Quality Management District. We all know that the air in Southern California is not great. That's why there are so many regulations and policies trying to improve the air quality, and have been for the last 30, 40 years. And we have made substantial improvements in the air basin over that time. You can all remember a time least us vintage folks, can remember a time when you couldn't see the mountains, and you guys are really close to the mountains. Now you can actually see the mountains a lot of the year. So the air quality on a regional basis has improved in some areas, but no one could realistically stand before you and say the air is really good. It's just for this urban suburban area, it meets most of the standards. The question we have to answer in the CEQA process and in our CEQA document is, does it exceed the thresholds that are established by the Air Quality Management District for that area? And if so, then you have to propose mitigation to reduce that. In this case, we have proposed actions that would help reduce the air quality impacts, but I'm not going to say that the additional cars that would be coming to an expanded hospital will make the air better, but realize that there are a lot of agencies and a lot of legislators working to try to reduce air quality impacts over the long term in the basin, including vehicle fuel standards, a green portfolio for the state's energy resources so that electricity is more clean when it's generated. It takes a huge effort to try to improve the air quality for California and Southern California region, and there are a lot of people working on that. But on an individual project basis for the CEQA process, that is the established procedure for determining whether the impacts, the air quality impacts of the project are significant or not, including what we call the local significance thresholds for when receptors are very close to the project. In this case, we have analyzed a worst case condition where receptors, being children as well as sensitive adults, would be right adjacent to the property, and those impacts have been determined to be less than significant. That's what I can tell you. I can't tell you the air is good, but I can tell you what the project impacts are and how we've tried to reduce those impacts.
Commissioner Kennedy, if I may add one item to that. Part of the specific plan does include a 15-foot setback from the park, and 10 feet of that would be required to be landscaped. The only type of installations in there would be essentially landscaping, walls, and pedestrian paths.
Commissioner Hawkes?
I was hoping you might also clarify that when you have to do an analysis of the emission impacts, and the methodology that you have to follow is a methodology that is provided by the AQMD. And maybe you can clarify that methodology doesn't necessarily take into account other policies that are currently in place or being developed that might have an impact on that methodology, such as state goals and objectives for introducing large quantities of electric vehicles or alternative fuel vehicles that have where there's goals to be met over the long term. That's not factored into this methodology. It's based on certain assumptions, as I understand it, that exist today on the types of emissions that are being generated and how they're generated. So it doesn't take into account these other policies and policy goals that are occurring through other means, as with regard to alternative fuel vehicles or energy generation, that sort of thing.
In some respects, that's true, but in another, it's not. In that the AQMD methodologies, the computer model that they require all CEQA documents to use that do air quality emissions estimates, is called CALIMOD. It's the California Emissions Estimate Model. And they have a guidebook for that. They instruct you how to estimate emissions. But where you have a project that goes over 10, 15, 20 years, such as this project, the emission rates that are assumed for vehicles are ratcheted down, assuming things like the clean fuel standards of the state will be ratcheting down, and those are tied together. So in a way, the model does take into account some of those statewide changes, not everything. There's no way to quantify every policy, but at least for some of those gross level of emission estimates, they do incorporate fuel emissions over time.
Okay, so then there are, it does take into account some of these estimates that ratchets down emissions over the long term when you have a project like this, but there's still potentially other policies that are being enacted that aren't accounted for or still to come that can't predict how, emissions will be generated from a project like this.
That's true.
Any other questions of staff? No. Any further comment from staff? No. No? Okay. All right. Let's talk about the wall. Is there, where are we at on that? Is there a consensus that we would like to? Now, if we did an 8-foot wall, that wouldn't change anything else. I mean, as far as
it wouldn't affect anything else.
It would just be this particular specific plan.
It would just be this particular specific plan. It would just be the wall adjacent to that.
Torrey Pine.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I have no.
You're good?
Yeah, I'm good going 8 feet, absolutely.
Okay. Marquez, down here, 8 feet from the wall. Commissioner Hing, you're good? Okay, then any further discussion on this? So we need a heading of the resolutions.
Resolutions, yes.
And I guess it would be amended for that 8-foot wall.
Yes, I'll express where that should
Okay.
happen. There's 3 resolutions before you. There's an environmental impact report resolution, which will be 19-6004. There's a general plan amendment resolution, which is 19-6005. And there's a zone change resolution, which is 19-6006. The zone change resolution is where the specific plan is found, so you would amend that resolution.
Is there a motion on the
I'll make a motion.
to approve?
Absolutely.
Okay, just want to be clear, I don't want to have a situation. Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second? Got a second by Commissioner Holtz, first by Commissioner Kennedy. May we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Holtz? Aye. Commissioner Hing?
Aye.
Commissioner Kennedy?
Aye.
Commissioner Jaquez?
Aye.
And Chairman Redholz.
Aye. Resolution passes 5-0, and this will be heard by the City Council. This is a recommendation, correct?
That is correct. As a recommendation, it will go to City Council for their decision.
Great. All right, great. Thank you very much. People in the audience, thank you, staff and consultants and all that, for doing a great job, very thorough, and I appreciate it. Thank you very much. I was thinking by the time this is done, some of us up here are going to be approaching middle age, I think, by the time this is done.
Wow.
Exactly.
I think he's looking through a rose-colored glasses.
All right. We have no non-hearing items, so we're at commission reports, comments, and miscellaneous.
Maybe we'll give people a second to clear the room.
We'll take a second to.
Oh, no, we got it. Be 30 seconds from it. Good night, Chip. Hi, Tony. Hi, Ron.
No, we just have.
Just take a couple.
Okay. Commission comments. Anybody have any comments on the commission? No, I just have one quickie. I just want to let everybody know that a week from tomorrow morning at 7 a.m., Sprouts will be opening. Next Wednesday, 7 a.m. They're going to be employing about 150 folks. It's going to be just no parking issues at all. I think that was a promise. And, we're looking forward to it, man. That's a biggie. So we're excited about that. And, of course, I've read comments on social media. What happened to the gym? Well, the gym is still going in. It's right next door. but, Sprouts is going to open up. And that's 7 a.m., and some of us will be there bright and early to, get our organic fruits and vegetables and other stuff. So that's all I have to say on that. Looking forward to that, and we will welcome them to West Covina. Director's report.
Yes, we have a forthcoming. We do not have any items for the October 8th meeting, so apparently you're going to have that night off, so maybe there'll be a playoff game. We'll see. And then there's a project status report before you tonight as well, with projects that the Planning Commission has approved over the past couple of years. So that's that.
All right. City Council action.
The appeal was continued till the appeal of the small waters facilities that this commission heard was continued to the October 1st meeting. And then we're going to do something a little different this year with the October 15th. There's going to be a planning month proclamation. That's planning month. There is such a thing. Who knew? So we invite the planning commissioners to come and be part of that at the October 15th meeting.
At the City Council meeting?
Correct.
Oh, really? Okay, cool. That October 1st meeting should be interesting. We've got that appeal, plus we have gas stations.
I'm sorry, yes, thank you for mentioning that. The code amendment for the alcohol sales at gas stations is also on that. Yeah, next Tuesday night.
All right, unless there's anything else, I guess not. We are adjourned. Thank you.